listening to MarceyLynn once again on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Well, hello, everybody. It's another Thursday. I am dropping my phone. One thing I can promise you on this show is that you're not going to have any of my phones ringing because I'm here at Yale in a beautiful little room. You know, they have their little beautiful rooms here. And I just wanted to thank you all for all the birthday wishes. My birthday's Monday. It's coming up. But let's talk about what we got going on today. I told you guys that I'm going to begin a bi-weekly series called The People's World Talks. This is the beginning of that, and I'm very excited about the fact that, of course, you guys always know that this is our gazillionth Black History Month celebration, because I don't put numbers on it because it's endless, and that we'll be having that at the People Center this weekend on Saturday, and I'm excited about that. But let me tell you something about, you guys know how long I've been working with YCL and our youth and all of our wonderful people that we have, these young people that have been coming from, it just seems like they're coming from the gods and the universe and the earth is, and all hell has to break loose for us to get these gifts. Well, I'll tell you one thing. There is a young man that I'm about to introduce to you all who is one of the gifts. And I'll tell you, when I was in Chicago and all hell was breaking loose and they introduced this young man that came up and battled these idiots that decided to try to get into our stuff. This young man, and I'm speaking to you all as the power source that I am, not being scared of saying who I am in these streets, to have someone. And, you know, it's not a Black thing, it's not a white thing, but it's always good to see our brothers, our baby boys, our baby girls out here doing stuff. But it's not even about color. I don't, as long as we bleed the same, we understand that. I have this gentleman, Aaron, coming here to tell you who he is and what he's doing in this world, not just in New Haven, but in this world. Not only for himself, but for me as an elder, for kids coming from behind him. And we all know that it could be 2 seconds before we lose our mind because of everything that's going on. Turn the news off. I think, who was it? Kendrick Lamar just said, shut the TV off. I think it's time for us to shut the TV off. You listen to the radio and stream good stuff like what you're about to hear from this gentleman. Aaron, introduce yourself to everyone.
Hey, so my name is Aaron. I'm 23 years old. Um, I'm originally from Austin, Texas. I started organizing when I was a high school student. Grew up in an area that was incredibly segregated. So I kind of cut my teeth in organizing around trying to get together a group of like students of color to pressure our school board of trustees and basically get them to consider policies to champion like racial justice and education equity, basically trying to make sure that like your race and your zip code doesn't determine the opportunities that like you're afforded. Fast forward a few years to 2020, when the Black Lives Matter uprising was happening. I, like many other young people, was incredibly outraged and wanted to get involved. I wanted to take action. So me and some of my friends, we started a like a youth organization and did a lot of stuff in conjunction with other groups who were working on racial justice initiatives, trying to like curb like racist police killings and things like that at the time. But I think my involvement in that kind of like uprising really taught me the like importance of social movements. But at the same time, you know, while I was recognizing like, okay, we have this like really like mass, awesome social movement, tons of people standing in solidarity with Black lives, there was also, right, like this kind of failure to like turn that sort of like mass movement into political power. And so that kind of resulted in me looking for kind of like an answer to all of the different issues that like my generation is dealing with, that I was dealing with as a like young Black person. And from there, I started doing a kind of like research into like history of different like social movements, looking at US history, and was trying to find like a political organization that I could consider my home. And lo and behold, I found the Communist Party of the United States of America, and also got involved with the Young Communist League due to my being a bit on the younger side. And yeah, I went to Howard University, just graduated pretty recently.
I
Um,
know. Right before Chicago. My nephew's at Howard. He's a junior. I was going to tell you that when I saw you in Chicago, but we never even got a chance to cross paths. It's just so fast.
yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I've been organizing for like since I was a kid, and yeah, I found the YCL, I found the party, and it's a decision that I very much love and never regret,
Mhm.
because going back to my earlier point about how, social movements are really awesome because they're able to make people aware of,
Mhm.
contradictions in society that we might not otherwise have the time or the energy to take notice of. But it's like, for me, the thing that really appealed to me about the party was the fact that we had like a strategy, and we had a very long-term plan for how
Mhm.
we're trying to build a better world. And so, yeah, I joined the party. I've been involved in organizing with the YCL for the last 3, 4 years now. And yeah.
I'm a proud mama. I'm a proud mama. I work very closely with the programs and with the director of YCL here in New Haven, and it's just very good to see. Very good to see. People are waking up, and we can now say that it's not other people fighting for us. We're fighting for ourselves, and we're gonna genuinely get the job done regardless. Um, I really, really appreciate you taking that time. I know you said you haven't been on podcasts or you haven't been on the radio before, but guess what? I know I'm gonna be calling on you again, so be prepared that I'll be like, Auntie Marcy needs you to do this show with this one because they trying to figure out what they gonna do. Okay? So every once in a while I have to just pull that card. But I really want you to start talking to the people here. This show will be here forever. We can use it as a tool when you're older. You show it to your kids when you marry your wife from the party and you have the red babies. You can go, "What's Dad when he was young." But
Yeah,
I'm looking
exactly.
forward to that part.
Me
So,
too.
you sent me some wonderful questions, and I want to be able to have the time to showcase them. You do have your full 55 minutes. Um, but you have a beautiful question about what role should young workers and progressive students play in the struggle against MAGA fascism? And how can we most effectively organize on campuses and in communities to meet this movement? Please give them your ideas. I have my own, but I am not 23.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me. But yeah, I think it's a really important question right now because there is this very serious fascist danger that is being led by this kind of like white nationalist MAGA faction. These people have a full like federal trifecta. They have control of Congress, they have control of the White House, they have control of the Supreme Court. And so I think right now, the moment that we're in is very much a struggle against fascism. And, since my role in the Young Communist League is primarily about like how do we organize young workers and progressive
Mhm.
students to kind of meet the moment that we're in. And so I really believe that we are going to have to organize on like multiple fronts right now. But to be a little bit more specific and to be a little
Mhm.
bit more concrete, I think we really have to focus on organizing in our communities, organizing in our workplaces, and organizing on the campuses. And the reason I say all of that is because the rollback of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, the attack on affirmative action,
Oh,
and
Jesus.
the broader efforts to dismantle public education, um, and other rights from like civil rights to labor rights, really demonstrates that, the struggle against MAGA, the struggle against fascism isn't abstract. It's something that directly impacts our future as young folk. And so young workers and progressive students have a very critical role to play in this fight back. And I really think in order to effectively fight back, we kind of have to move a little bit beyond this kind of like corporate driven understanding of equity
Mm-hmm.
and, push this very working class concept of equality. Lenin argued that the struggle for democracy is the path to socialism. And
Mm-hmm.
so engaging with this fight is not only right about defending our rights, but it's also about helping us build a broader, more mass movement. And so this is going to be especially critical, I think, for recruiting women, for recruiting people of color, and other kind of historically oppressed groups who are somewhat on the front lines of these attacks. And, on the campuses, what I think we need to do, we need to work with building strong like student unions, and we
Mm-hmm.
also need like more YCL chapters, and we also need more young people to get involved in student government so that they can actually put
Yes.
a pressure on their school's administration to do something to defend equality, to resist their plans to, send people to the back of the bus, send us to the back of the closets, and all of that horrible stuff, send us back to a place where we don't ever want to go again. And
Yes.
so, related to this, something I would love to mention is that the United States Student Association,
Mm-hmm.
organization that played a really, really critical role in student organizing in the like early part of like the 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
kind of fell off, but is kind of coming back again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of where I see like a student union playing a very critical role.
There you
Um,
go.
Young people, like our students especially, I think, are often like a little removed from politics. They don't often understand like what is at stake for them as students. And so I think organizations like the United States Student Association are really, really promising. And that's an organization that we as progressive people really need to be like fighting for influence in. And outside of like the work on the campuses with the student unions, the YCL chapters, having some more progressive student governments, I also think that we have to focus on what we're doing to reach young workers, because not every young person is someone who's on the campus. And so we really, I think, need more young workers to engage in salting, to strategically like take up jobs in particular industries and organize from within. And, this is already something that some people in the YCL are doing, like some comrades in New York
Mm-hmm.
have been doing around like Amazon and the labor union there. But I think it just goes to show that there are tons of young people, tons of young workers who are very interested in, organizing and,
Holding space.
yeah, holding space and, trying to actually like get a good job that gives them good benefits and
Mm-hmm.
pays them enough to live. So I really think that those two fronts, organizing on our campuses, organizing in our workplaces, is really, really critical. And then also too, I think outside of the campuses, outside of the
Mm-hmm.
workplaces, we have to be in the community, because there is power in our communities and a lot of it is really untapped. And so I really think that we're going to have to get more involved in like neighborhood organizing as well, in
Yes.
conjunction with the work that we're doing on the campuses and in the workplaces. And we really have to, I think, get back to like traditional grassroots organizing around the issues that directly matter the most to people,
Yes.
because that's really like where we can build a strong base to make sure that we have a really mass resistance that is actually made up of millions of working everyday people. And
Mm-hmm.
then, alongside all of this, we're going to need to engage in like protests and other kinds of large scale demonstrations. There's going to be a need for, more militant acts of civil disobedience to
Mm-hmm.
help shift the political terrain. And, all of that is going to have to be accompanied with electoral work, because we can't afford to seed the ballot box. And
That goes with your next question too. Yeah.
yeah, it is. And so, to wrap it up, because I know I've been talking for a second, I really think that
This is about you. This is your 55 minutes, okay?
but I really think that the fight that we're in right now is about more than just the policies that we're reacting to. This is
Yeah.
also a fight for our future. And so, if we're serious about organizing young workers and progressive students, I really think that we have to frame the struggle that we're in very clearly. And I'm a little biased to the slogan because it's something that our YCL chapter here in DC brought up during the People's March that happened back in January. But the slogan that we kind of raised was our freedom, our future, we're not going back. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think by really emphasizing this fight as one for our future, one for our freedom, we're going to be able to build a movement that is made up of people who don't want to go back, who are ready to resist, but are also ready to like insist, right? Because we don't want to just be purely stuck in the defensive. We also need to be
Mm-hmm.
offensive, and we need to present people with a compelling vision of what it is that we're trying to build. So yeah, that's what I'll say on that front.
Yeah, and you know what? It's beautiful to hear you say, um, what we need to do is something I always say, and my words to most people are, if you don't like what's being served at the table, get a seat at the table and change the meal. Why do you want to sit in the back and complain if you have all the opportunity? Because I don't know how to do this and I don't know how to speak to people. I don't know. I said, but you just spoke to me and told me what your problem was and how you think that this needs to be fixed. Those are the steps. The steps are to share with others what you need to have improved. And if you have a seat at the table, it's even easier than you yelling at me because someone else didn't do it. But you know there's an empty seat. You just there really are some people out there, Aaron, and you know that just don't want to do the work.
I
So,
do.
and when it brings me to your next question, it's just like we need to draw all the lessons from past movements. We are back there. We are so back there. I feel like sometimes I'm in the 1930s. I feel like the civil rights movement just revived itself a little quieter, but like, you know, the relevant revolution is not even a revolution because people are tired of fighting and some people are fighting with the fighting us. Because they think
Yes,
something
exactly.
is better over there. And that's the scariest part of it. All the
That
people that
is.
are literally fighting us and don't realize how bad November was.
No,
Um,
exactly.
and I like that you have like people don't understand all everything that's going on. Anti-Vietnam movement, the civil rights movement, the labor upsurge in the 30s, apartheid. Come on, we have to remember that all of these strategies are ways that make us say we're not going back because we pay attention to history. So now if they wipe that out, what are we going to have? What are
Exactly.
these babies that are growing up, going into school, thinking that everything's rosy and thinking that, you know, nothing happened, especially to us. So now we're all US citizens until he's done evicting the others. Then they'll be like,
Mhm.
wait, but you're from Africa, so now we got to get rid of you too. They're not paying attention, Aaron.
Yeah.
So how would you pay, like make someone that just has no idea pay attention? You know, how do we get them to organize strategically with people that don't want to? What are your ideas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Going back to what you were saying earlier about how, there are people who are attacking us who don't realize that what they're doing isn't like helping them. It kind of reminds me of how growing up, my parents would always say, like a hard head makes for a soft behind. And
Mm-hmm.
I really think that the reason that people are kind of just doing things right now and they're not necessarily evaluating the effectiveness of the tactics that they're adopting is because they haven't taken the time to actually study the history of past movements to help us understand, what organizing strategies might work today. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always think it's really important actually for us to like look at US history specifically, because I think the history of our country is one that very much shows that the democratic struggle and the class struggle intersect a lot. And, you know, if we are serious about kind of meeting the moment that we're in, I think we have to understand that, you know, this kind of like American first nationalism that the sort of like, you know, MAGA movement is pushing isn't a new phenomenon. This
Not at all.
is, yeah, exactly. This is a very, very old um, interest in US history. And I really think that this is part of why my organizing strategy, you know, outside of me being a Marxist, is really about looking backwards so that we can like look forward, you know. And so I think looking at past movements is really interesting because not only, right, does it show that the democratic struggle and the class struggle intersect, and that, you know, today's movements are going to have to understand that intersection in order to be effective. I think looking at, you know, the civil rights movement is also really critical right now too, because it goes to show that we really have to build a kind of like broad coalition if we're serious about defeating these people, because
Mhm.
in the same way that these people are the white supremacist faction of today, you know, MLK and other folks in the civil rights movement had to contend with segregationists and other kinds of like white nationalists, like Southern Dixiecrats, for instance.
Mhm.
You know, that's not something that they were just like, okay, you know, these are reactionary interests in the Democratic Party. We're just not going to engage with them. Instead, you know, people like MLK, people like Ella Baker, and
Mhm.
Mississippi Freedom Movement were like, hey, we're actually going to fight for Black political power, and we're going to actually try to organize to push these people out of our coalition.
Of
Um,
course.
and so that's really what I think like the history is like super useful for helping us to understand.
It's so
It
we
helps
not
us,
to make the same mistakes, Aaron. It's like there's
yes,
really not a lot of mistakes that we're making, except for the fact that, it's hard to protect someone when someone is genuinely wanting to kill them. That's
yeah,
one thing. But that doesn't mean that you stop there. A lot of things stop because people follow people. Now, if we could get people to follow each other, and then if something happens, a demise, or that person changes their mind that they were following, they could still keep moving forward. And I think a lot of the failures, which we didn't have that many, I know you understand that we are communists 105 years now because we have not had many mistakes. And we also knew when to be quiet, to be silent.
mhm,
So that is the best part of what you're saying. Find the strategies that work, move forward, and make sure you have backup.
yes,
That's
exactly.
that's, kind of, because sometimes people get lost. They're like, oh, not sure. Well, that's exactly how it is. That's the breakdown of it. I'm one of those. I'm gonna break it down for you if you need it broken down. So
No,
it's
exactly.
a lot of times the kids, because you guys come from a whole new digital age that we didn't have access to back when I was in school in the 80s and 90s, and
Mhm.
so, it's amazing that there are so many of you now that there's really no way to lose. No way to lose because everybody's paying attention. I really like this question about connecting the fight for democracy
Mhm.
to the materials of interest to the young people. It's like, how do I make that PlayStation 6, or how do I make that struggle or protest or civil disobedience as exciting as the PlayStation, whatever numbers are coming out soon, or as exciting as TikTok or social media, or how do I? And a lot of times we have to use those tools. But how do you do that right now? Me, talk to this 53-year-old in a couple days. What is it? Because I literally am working with so many youth organizations right now that you use as a tool for them to understand that. Hmm, there are so many, like your question literally reads perfectly. How do we connect the fight for democracy to the material interests of young people, jobs, housing, education, economic security, so they don't have to go out there and do everything else is sitting up jail, stealing cars, selling things that they don't need to be selling to their own? Like, how do we make it exciting enough?
No, exactly. I was really interested in this question because I think there are a lot of people in the kind of like pro-democracy movement, inside of like the small d democratic camp, whatever we want to call it, people who like democracy, people who are willing to fight for democracy. Um, I think there are a lot of people in that movement who sometimes get a little too caught up on democracy as a like process, or democracy as like a set of like policies or like a set of laws, that they don't often understand that for like working class people who are struggling with rent, who are struggling with inaccessible healthcare, who
Mhm.
are struggling with unemployment, they don't understand, I think, that it doesn't do us a lot of good to talk so much about democracy and talk about how it's so important for us to defend it if people are like living in a kind of like economic situation where they feel like democracy isn't doing anything for them.
Mhm. Not a
And
thing.
this is something I always like to bring up because my dad is one of the most apolitical people I have ever met in my life. And, for me, this is like really, really important because whenever I would try to talk to my dad about why democracy matters, about why he should vote, he'd always be like, well, it doesn't really do much to help put food on the table for my family because that's the only thing that he's concerned about. And, working people, working families, it's not that we don't care about democracy, it's that we as organizers, I think, have to do a better job of emphasizing the material stakes of democracy. So I think on this front, we really have to emphasize how MAGA's Project 2025 agenda is really about hurting democracy and also destroying the kind of like living conditions of working people.
Hmm.
They want to do tax cuts for their billionaire friends, and then at the same time, they want to make us working people pay for those tax cuts. And so I think we really have to make the case that the fight for democracy is not just about abstract political rights, but
Hmm.
it's also about securing jobs, making housing more affordable, delivering quality education, and making people feel economically secure. And so on this front, I think emphasizing how MAGA's policies are going to prioritize the interests of the wealthy, like their
Hmm.
tax cuts, is really helpful for informing like working class young people that,
Hmm.
hey, there are stakes with democracy, and those
Yeah.
stakes relate to your opportunities and they relate to your economic security. And so I think while we do that, like emphasizing the material stakes, we also have to integrate like, electoral and like non-electoral strategy, because that's
Hmm.
also another thing. A lot of young people, they don't have a lot of political experience.
Hmm.
And so I think we make, again, a pretty big mistake when we try to say, electoralism, voting is like the main and only thing that we're telling people to do, because that's what younger people will fixate on. They'll be like, okay, well, you're saying vote. Like, how are we going to vote against this? Um,
Yeah.
what does that do? And it's like we have to do more than just vote. In October,
Understanding the steps.
yeah, exactly. Like in
Understand.
October, I organized a few YCL members to go down to Philadelphia to like go like knock on doors, go talk to people about the issues, so that one, our young people who can get a little too much in the online space can like live in reality and go talk to
Hmm.
some working class people.
Hmm.
But also, two, I think that like idea that like democracy is like something that we practice, and we exercise democracy through like canvassing, we exercise democracy through like trying to engage like working class people about these issues, is like part of how we make it more appealing to young people.
Yes.
And then also too, I think on like kind of like the non-electoral approach, I really think that we have to emphasize, like labor organizing as like a part of democracy. The whole
Definitely.
situation with the National Labor Relations Board right now is really, really scary. And, there are a lot of young people who will say, like, I love unions, I care so much about the labor movement. And then those will be the same people who don't understand the importance of voting or understand the need to do like canvassing. And it's like, we really, I think, have to emphasize that we are about this kind of like two-pronged approach. Like, yes, we have like electoral organizing strategies, but we also have non-electoral organizing strategies, and those aren't like two separate things. Again, they are very much related.
Yeah, everything's like relating to the next question because now you're talking about the balancing. Because a lot of I have a hard time balancing, so I have no idea how some of you guys, you kids, do it, balancing school and work and protests and this and this. You know, it was different for me. So like when you do the different forms, like you said, how do you balance those different forms? Um, like, okay, I'm in the midst of um, a real big labor organizing event in my life, but now it's time for me to figure out how I'm going to turn something that's happened to make it more fresh into a mass protest or one of the other things that we have. Just labor organizing alone is a real tough thing.
Yeah.
The electoral work, the student activism, all the things that you have in the question itself, they're all steps, but you have to be ready for everything else. So how would you make somebody prepared to balance almost four or five things at the same time, but they're all connected? I know how to do it because I literally balance 11 things. I'm balancing three things right now, even though we're here on the radio. So, but
Yeah.
it comes with maturity, but at the same rate, it needs to happen a little faster.
Hmm.
I think kids y'all are used to things happening faster.
Yeah, we are.
But now y'all gonna have to make it come
Hmm.
faster. Yeah.
No, exactly. I think it's a really important question, because exactly like you said, as young people, we're used to things happening faster, and the reason that we're used to that is because of these like social media algorithms that
Mm, so
kind
me.
of messing with our brain chemistry. But also, I think part of that is like the fact that a lot of young people, we come into the movement with like little to no political experience. So that goes back to your point about the lack of maturity. And it's like, if we want young organizers to understand how to balance these different forms of struggle, how to balance, like our mass protests, how to balance our militant civil disobedience, how do we balance labor organizing, electoral work, student
You know
activism.
what? I'm gonna let me respect the question
Yeah, yeah,
because
yeah.
he's so brilliant. Let me word his question. Let me put his question out there for you. His question says, how should young organizers balance different forms of struggle? Mass protests, militant civil disobedience, labor organizing, electoral work, student activism, things that I like. Oh, and like this, like all issue, like immediate when you have something going on. How do I fix that thing? So you have to at the same time issue-based community organizing campaigns. So we got all this stuff going on in the world, but now we got this right here in our face. Now, we get into the next part, which says, how should young organizers determine where to put their energy for the greatest impact? That's a beautiful question. You need to answer that one. Because the next part of this question, the billionaires like Elon Musk, who I watched to give checks to people, who I watched hand money to people, and Peter Thiel, oh Lord, are
Hmm.
backing MAGA far right agenda to fast money is not good money. That's what's going on with that. Expand
Exactly.
corporate power. Pushing tax cuts for the ultra wealthy, the people that we don't even see, the gazillionaires, people that we don't even know have money and their money has money, and then they
Hmm.
got some more money. That's who they're pushing. And, we got to mobilize. With the more that we see what they're doing, we got to get together and say, okay, we see what's going on. How can we
Hmm.
let people know it's wrong? How many people can we stop from going that way? The tax cuts for their friends, okay? These tax
Hmm.
cuts for their friends, guess who's paying for them?
Us.
Literally. The question says Department of Government Efficiency.
Hmm.
How can we expose? We have to let people see what's really happening instead of hearing what's happening and then the news takes it left, right, or sideways. Because anybody can be happy if they look at what makes them happy. And
Hmm.
that's the problem that we're having, especially with our youth. It makes me happy to have $1,000 right now. I watched it happen in Philadelphia over and over again. Oh shoot! Right now
Yeah.
I got $1,000, so I'm only 2 days away from this. I'm about to go in there. go red all day, because I don't know that $1,000 is going to be over with before you even hit red. So yeah,
Yes.
so it's just pushing tax cuts for the ultra wealthy while undermining democratic institutions through schemes like the Department of Government Efficiency. I just still, it doesn't even flow right. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
And how are we supposed to
Definitely.
fight?
No, exactly. So, kind of going back a little bit to the last question,
Mm-hmm.
I think my point about the lack of political experience is kind of why I think it's like super important for like us to make young people understand like what are the different tactics in your arsenal as an organizer and what is the like role of like each tactic, because tactics are intended to produce specific results, and that's something that people who are new organizers, who are young organizers, we don't often understand. And going back to like kind of like why I got involved in organizing, it's like for me, I saw like BLM and I saw these like mass protests, but the mass protests didn't turn into political power. And so that's kind of like what made me personally realize like, okay, like our mass protests, like that's how we shift public consciousness, but that doesn't necessarily build long-term power, turn into long-term structures, which is kind of where I think like the other things come in. So, you have your mass protests and your civil disobedience, which is all good for like generating momentum for shifting public consciousness. But at the same time, while we do those things, we have to, I think, make sure that all of that work is being backed up by like structures. So on this front, some structures that kind of come to mind are like labor unions, student organizations, and then other community groups, so that we can turn these mobilizations into lasting power. And I think kind of like related to all of this too is like a few questions that like young organizers should try to ask themselves. I think we need to learn how to assess like our political conditions. We have to ask ourselves like, where is the opposition weakest? Where
Mm-hmm.
can pressure create real shifts? We have to
Mm-hmm.
think about the capacity of our movement. What infrastructure currently exists and where does it need reinforcement? Where does support need to be provided? We also have to consider tactical leverage as well. We have to
Mm-hmm.
ask ourselves, will direct action or civil disobedience work? Or
Mm-hmm.
is there going to be a need for workplace organizing? Or is there
That's
going
the
to be a
push.
need for electoral work? We have to figure out like which tactic is going to be the most effective tool in any given moment, because
Mm-hmm.
we shouldn't tie like a hand behind our back. We should be using every tool in our arsenal, because
Yes.
enemies are, and so we do too. And then we also, I think, have to think about the sustainability of our movement. We have to ask ourselves, like, is this effort a part of a long-term strategy, or will it burn out after a single moment?
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, I think young organizers need to combine multiple strategies so that we can make sure these like spontaneous mobilizations are being like channeled into like structured long-term organizing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of where I think this like second question, right, of like, how do we, push back against this corporate coup that Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and
Mm-hmm.
these other people are trying to do through this like Department of Government Efficiency? I really think that we have to focus right now on trying to connect the dots. We have to
Mm-hmm.
show to people in very clear and concise language how these billionaires are attacking democracy because they want to enrich themselves. And so we have to highlight right now how their tax cuts for the ultra wealthy come at the expense of public education,
They
come
do.
at the expense of healthcare, come at the expense of the Department of Labor and workers' rights. And we have to, I think, also frame the fight that we're in very like clear terms. Instead of allowing these billionaires to pose as like this kind of like outside force, as allowing Trump to present himself as the anti-establishment candidate, we have to make it very clear that these people are the establishment and that they're rigging the system for their benefit. And so while we're doing that, I think, again, this is kind of like where the multiple tactics are going to come in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you already have people like Reverend Al Sharpton saying that we need
Yes.
to be doing like economic boycotts against companies like Target that are going back on DEI.
Not a day. I said it'll take a month for us to even make a difference to them.
Yeah, exactly. And then you also, I think, too, have these like protests that have been happening outside of the Department of Public Education, outside of the Department of the Treasury. And so again, this is kind of why I want to focus on like, making sure that these spontaneous mobilizations aren't just going to burn out. And we actually need to like channel them into something that is long term. And so that's why I think like connecting the dots, framing the fight that we're in, and really trying to disrupt their narrative is how we
Mm-hmm.
can make their attack on democracy a working class issue. And just the other day, I'm going to wrap up after this. Just the other day, I was at a like a AFGE rally with the union that represents like federal government employees.
Yes, yes,
I
yes, yes, yes.
saw people from
Oh my
AFSCME
God.
there representing like state and local and
Mm.
municipal employees. I saw people from the Communication Workers of America. I saw steel workers. So, I say all that to say there are sections of the working class that are waking up and they're realizing that this is a corporate coup and that
Mhm.
we have to defend our democracy because we can't rely on anyone else to defend it. And so yeah, that's where I'll end off.
Yeah, it's amazing because you have defeating MAGA requires both fracturing their coalition and building our own, but it was so hard beforehand. So we can't keep using what we used beforehand because now we're here. So using the facts now should make it easier. So I'm hoping that we're paying attention and using the facts and showing the steps as to where things are the opposite of what we're seeing, even though they're going to make it look like it's ice cream cake and it really is just cake. You know,
Mhm.
I really want the kids to understand when you say building our own, it means building something that is solid. How can we expose and exploit divisions within the MAGA movement while uniting and mobilizing it's all strategy. It you can't come up with a strategy by yourself, right?
You
You can't
can't.
be the only team member in your strategic team. So you have to be able to listen. You have to be able to take the facts and use them and get the seat at the table and make the big difference. We have about 20 more minutes, but let me just make a quick announcement. Then I'll speak. It's Bowie, right? Is it Bowie?
It's Boo like Halloween.
Boo. Okay, so I'm speaking with Aaron Boo with the E. I like that. Boo with E, because I'm Marcy with the E.
Yeah.
And he is a phenomenal leader with our YCL USA. And just meeting him from a distance, not having a chance to meet him, I was just so excited that we were able to have the opportunity for him to come and speak with us on this upcoming Saturday, the 22nd. And today is technically Thursday. So please meet us at the People Center on Saturday in New Haven, 37 House Street. You'll see the flyer before and after. And come, bring your teenagers, bring your, what do you call it, tweens, bring your almost teens, because we're going to need these babies. Because they're going to have a whole lot of fixing to do with these 4 years and what's going on. And he's given me some beautiful questions, which, he has more than answered. And I'm going to give him, he has his last 15 minutes, and I want to make sure that I give him the time to answer his last three questions. So, number 6, defeating MAGA requires both fracturing their coalition and building our own. That's the one we're talking about. But the best part of this question, on top of all the questions are great. How can we expose and exploit divisions within the MAGA movement while uniting and mobilizing our side? What strategic path should we take to reclaim the House and shift the balance of power? We still have time. We could end this in 2 years. We could end this in
Exactly.
2 years.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't
So
think people understand that. We could end
I
it
don't think so either.
in a couple weeks. I don't think people understand that. We can end that, but I don't think people understand that part because they
Yeah.
don't understand government and how it works.
Hmm.
They think
And
everything they read can happen immediately.
Yeah, and I think also they don't understand that, MAGA isn't this like monolithic force.
Mm,
It's a coalition, just
mhm,
like any coalition, and it's made up of people who don't always agree because that's the thing about coalitions, you're supposed to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so,
mhm,
when thinking about MAGA and thinking about like who is in this coalition, a few people kind of come to mind for me, or rather a few forces. So you have your reactionary billionaires like Elon Musk and Peter
mhm,
Thiel, and then like other people who we don't even know about. And then you also have, these kind of like religious fundamentalists, these religious nationalists, and then you also have these kind of like white nationalists as well, posing as populists. And so these factions, I think they don't always agree. A very specific example of like how they don't always agree kind of comes to mind when thinking about like the different scandals that Trump was involved in, the
mhm,
scandals around like sexual assault, the scandals around his religious ignorance. All of those things were, hurting his alliance with the Christian nationalist faction, which is kind of why I think you don't see like Mike Pence in that camp anymore, and like other people, kind of like Betsy DeVos and stuff like that.
mm,
And so I think in order to like fracture their coalition, we as like the Communist Party and as the Young Communist League, I think we really need to focus on the fact that right now there are not a lot, but there are many like working class like MAGA supporters who are being sold this grift by Trump and his billionaire backers. And I think
mhm,
right now, because of this corporate coup that we're seeing, because of this like fraud of a department of government efficiency, we have a very special moment to highlight how MAGA's policies are ultimately only going to benefit the ultra rich while
mhm,
leaving everybody else behind. And so I think exposing that hypocrisy, really
mhm.
trying to emphasize that, Trump and his friends, they all like to claim that they're against the deep state, they're against, this wasteful government spending. But the only reason that they say those things is because they want to expand government power for their own fascist aims. And so I think
Mm,
we have to focus on those two things. And whenever there is like opportunity to do so, I think we have to use whatever wedge issues that we can to splinter and fracture their coalition
mhm.
as much as possible, because in the
Yes.
same way that the ruling class has relied on this divide and conquer strategy to keep the multiracial working class from coming together, we also, I think, have to be ready to exploit divisions within the ruling class, take advantage of the contradictions within our enemy's coalition,
Mhm,
while at the same time trying to build our side. And I think the way that we kind of go about building our side is by organizing working class communities. And this is where I think having more like neighborhood level organizing, more issue specific campaigns
mhm,
really creates opportunities to do so, to be a little bit more concrete. And to give an example, here in DC, our YCL is like really involved in organizing around like getting a fair city budget so that we can
mm,
have like funds available to get rid of childhood poverty,
mhm,
actually do something about the youth unemployment, which is
mhm,
very much related to the issue of crime, and
mhm.
it's also related to the fight for democracy here in DC. And while we do that stuff, organizing our communities, I think we also have to, again, we can't see the ballot box. The ballot box belongs to working people. And so I think on this front, we really do have to support unapologetically progressive candidates. And we
Yes.
also, I think, have to support people who are progressive and willing to actually call MAGA for what it is, be like, this is a
Yes.
fascist movement. And, I'm progressive and I'm going to like attack this movement and I'm going to oppose them at any and every turn. And so I think those two things, like organizing our communities, getting involved in electoral work is really going to be how we can reclaim the House. Especially if we like focus on like key swing districts where there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be feeling betrayed by some of the economic policies that like MAGA and these billionaires are kind of adopting. And so I say all that to say, I think that if we can like take advantage of this moment, to take advantage of like the things that MAGA is doing, we can, again, kind of like you said, we can take back the House and we can stop them from implementing most of
Yes.
their plan. Because the only reason that they're able to do all of this right now is because they have a full federal trifecta. There
Mhm.
votes to actually stop them from doing what they're doing. So I think we need to, again, organize our communities, get involved in electoral work, especially where there are like anti-MAGA candidates. And that's
Mhm.
how we're going to take back the House. And that's how we're going to shift the political terrain so that we don't always have to spend our time as organizers dealing with attack after attack on vulnerable communities. Like we
Yeah.
need to, shift the political terrain so that we can actually go on the offensive against these people.
The best part of it is like I like that your question now lets people really understand that it's things before November that are really troubling. So your second to last question is youth around the world have mobilized against Israel's war on Gaza. We're not going to talk about the T word and the N word, Trump and Netanyahu. They're beyond doubling down. It's horrible. Um, he's vowed to send even deadlier weapons while cutting. Wait, that reminds me. Him firing everybody that's in charge of the nuclear. The nuclear. Yeah. Did you hear about that part?
Oh,
Anyway,
actually, I didn't hear about that part.
yeah, you should look that up.
I will.
Fire the people that are protecting the nuclear weapons. But
Oh, yes, actually, I do recall this. I do recall this now.
so that's troubling.
Very troubling.
How he's vowed to send deadlier weapons while cutting humanitarian aid. Like it's just U.S. aid. Like,
Yeah.
how can you, as a young organizer, sustain the fight for peace and expose how like the endless wars that we're literally in war with our own government right now?
Yeah.
How are you guys gonna make it broad enough for people to understand? Let's work with what's going on here on our soil.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of why I think the earlier question, how do we
Hmm.
like take advantage of the lessons from past movements?
Hmm.
I really think that is kind of like where I try to start with on this question of like how do we as young people stay involved in the fight for peace? Because for me, I'm always like, okay, the moment that we're in is like really bad right now, obviously.
Hmm.
And, it's one that requires like clear action. But at the same time, I always try to remind myself about the struggle against South African apartheid and the anti-Vietnam War to really, again, make me understand that there are other people who have fought against war and fought against apartheid and they won. And, you know, that is really what always like centers me whenever I feel so like hopeless or so nihilistic about the situation that we're in. History is like always my bedrock and is always kind of like the foundation for the work that I do today.
Yes.
So I think related to that too, um, in order to like actually like sustain the fight for peace, which I think there are a lot of opportunities to do so right now, because global militarism hurts our communities here at home, and then also domestic repression, which is very very real, and it's not just like in the form of Project 2025 that is trying to get rid of like hard-won democratic rights. You also have Project Esther, which is, the far right's plans for
Hmm.
silencing the pro-Palestinian movement and
Hmm.
for, crushing our movement for peace here. And so on this front, I think we really have to, one, like frame the fight as like tied to sort of like our domestic priorities. Like we have to tie the money that is spent on these like endless wars abroad with
Yeah.
demand to fund our communities here at home. And so I think this is like arguably like the strongest point that we have.
Hmm.
Here in DC, the DC branch of the CP is involved in this like DC for Palestine coalition. And this is kind of like the main thing that they do. They try to emphasize that like every dollar that is spent on military aid to Israel could be used to fund schools, could be used to fund healthcare, or could be used to, deal with housing and like solve homelessness. So I
Because our own
think that
government is fighting against all of that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think we have to make this connection super clear so that we can bring in more people into the peace movement. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, like what do these like endless conflicts abroad have to do with like the problems that we're dealing with here at home?
Mhm.
So we have to make that connection crystal clear for people.
Definitely. I mean, like you have it in your last question with so many urgent struggles ahead. What role should YCL play in organizing young people for democracy, peace, and socialism? How do we go beyond reacting to crisis like one on one? Oh, it's just this little thing, and we need to and build durable, strategic organizations for the long term. We need
Yeah.
YCL, CP, and we got they have all these different organizations. We all come together and we do some very powerful things, even unions and that. But y'all kids, we leave in y'all. We won't. What do you got? You're building. YCL will be forefront. CP will be like, okay, these are the retirees. The retirees of CP. And YCL will be like, they're gone. Just let
Babies.
the kids go.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I think it's a really important question. And for me, I feel like right now the two like sort of like big issues that the YCL is dealing with, I think like number one is obviously right, like the fight against like MAGA, really trying to defeat fascism. And then, related to that too, I think is the fight, or not the fight rather, but the struggle for peace,
Mhm,
like
mhm,
really emphasizing that, the fight for democracy and the fight for peace, they're not like disconnected from each other. The struggle against fascism, the
mhm,
struggle against US imperialism, these are
mhm.
two sides, these are two different sides of the same coin at the end of it.
Yes.
And so this is kind of like why in like my earlier question, I think like on the peace front, we have to, tie war spending to, our domestic issues here at home. We should
Yes.
encourage like more young people in the labor movement to, get involved in kind of like more like peace work.
Mhm,
On that front, I think the National Labor Network for a ceasefire is very interesting. I think the letter that was sent by like the Postal Workers Union, the
mhm.
Flight Attendants Union, and like all of the other unions being like, we want an end to US military aid for Israel is like one
Mhm.
of the most like powerful developments in the labor movement of the last
Yes.
few
Yes.
centuries. And I think that's something that a lot of young people in particular can be like mobilized around. And
Yeah.
then I think also too, while we do those two things, we have to, expose the complicity, and again, expose the bipartisan complicity, because
Yes.
while like MAGA's like militarism is very extreme, we have to, I think, also to understand that, centrist Democrats like Biden, they gave money for this war. And in many ways, that's kind of like
Mhm.
why we're in the situation that we're in today. And so I think we have to build a
Yeah.
principled peace movement that is capable of holding all parties
Yes.
accountable. And, we're also going to have
We're
to
screaming peace, but our government is supporting
exactly. And,
supporting the fight.
we're also going to need civil disobedience too. We're going to have to
Mhm.
think about what kinds of campaigns that we can do to target weapon manufacturers. We're going to have to think about the role of
I
economic
love the
and
militant
all
part
of
of
that.
it. The militant civil disobedience. We can't just do
Yeah.
what we normally do.
We gotta bring it back.
We got to
We
get up.
gotta bring back that tradition of civil rights activism. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Black
so
Panthers.
yeah, so I always think that those two issues are kind of like the main issues of the day. And I really think that the reason I focus on those issues is because our YCL is like pretty small. Arguably, we only really have around like 6 active chapters, primarily like in like the Midwest or like on the East Coast, like in
Mhm,
Connecticut and
mhm.
DC. And so I really think that in order to effectively confront MAGA fascism, to confront US imperialism, we're going to have to grow our ranks, we're going to have to build new chapters, and we're also going to have to develop the next generation of young leaders to fight for peace, fight for
Indeed.
democracy, and fight for socialism. And so
Yes.
on that front, something that I'm really working on, in my capacity as like national YCL organizer, is to build like kind of like a youth organizing toolkit. So making sure that people are coming into the movement with like clear steps for how they should be like organizing themselves and how they should be operating, making sure that there's like alignment so that they understand like what are the key issues
Mhm.
for our organization and like where do we stand on those issues. And, you know, also I think too, getting involved in like events that are happening. We had like a lot of people go to the People's March in
Mhm.
January, which I thought was really awesome. We were on NBC, and you know we were looking very, very militant. So I think leaning into that, and then also I think too making sure that we're staying like rooted in what's happening in the labor movement, what's happening in the civil rights
Mhm.
movement. Um, our YCL, we went to the Reverend Sharpton's MLK Day sermon. And, you know, a lot of people will have their opinions about Reverend Sharp, but
Yes.
his sermon was very, very, very powerful. It was very like struggle
Mhm.
oriented, very
Mhm.
historically grounded, was highlighting the legacies of like Frederick Douglass, Harriet
Yes.
Tubman, Ella Baker, MLK, like all of the greats. And so I really think those kinds of things are how we kind of like build coalitions between like civil rights and labor, and how we can also stress that unity is like what it's going to take to actually defeat these people. And so yeah, I'll say all that to say another thing that we're also trying to do right now is organize kind of like a national call to bring
Mhm.
together our YCL chapters and other young people who are like in the orbit of the YCL to kind of
Mhm.
talk about how to build coalitions.
And
And
understand how to.
yes, because a lot of people will talk about coalitions, but people don't understand how broad a coalition should be. And so we're hoping to put together a panel of young people to basically talk about like a few topics. Like we want to talk about
Mhm.
defending our freedom. How do we like block MAGA's attacks on democracy, on labor, on civil rights? We want to talk about protecting our families. How do we resist these attacks on vulnerable communities?
Mhm.
Especially undocumented immigrants and transgender young people. And also, right, how do we frame the fight that we're in as a fight for our future? So, how do we engage young people
Mhm.
in like long-term, year-round political struggle? So those are kind of like a
Yes.
few things that we're trying to do to build the YCL to meet the moment that we're in.
You're doing so much. And I cannot even tell you how much I appreciate it. And I cannot tell you how my heart continues to jump every time I go. Like at Chicago, I literally almost started crying when I was like, he's what? And he's at from where? Because it's just a Howard
Texas.
thing. It's a Howard thing. It's a Howard thing. It's a Bison thing. But it is what it is.
Yeah,
But I
exactly.
cannot even possibly thank you enough for the time and space with me and letting me be your first radio show and online platform or whatever the kids call it these days. But it will definitely not be your last. And we're definitely going to have another couple conversations with some other groups around here trying to do things. And I look forward to my daughter's getting ready she's thinking that way. So I probably will be down there working with you within the next year or so because
Yeah, I'm looking forward to
I
it.
know she's just heart set on Morgan. She got into all 13 schools that she applied for. So we will see how that goes for her. I'm
Yeah,
so very proud of that. But Aaron, who
congratulations.
thank you so much for spending the time with me. You've been listening to MarceyLynn once again on 103.5. Any last words for our youth and our grown folks that don't know better?
Yeah, I think my last words, I would just say that I think right now we gotta like stay grounded. I think we have to stay in the struggle. And I think we really just like can't afford to give up, you know?
And
The conservative
come out on
movement, the far
Saturday,
right.
find out. Join
Yes,
us.
and then
Join
come
us on
on Saturday.
Saturdays. Sign on
Join
up.
us on
We got some
Saturday.
things that you can do. Come on, kids. Come on, children. Come learn. Come learn. I can't wait to see you Saturday.
I
We've
also
been
can't.
celebrating everyone there and celebrating my birthday and celebrating just life in general. Because you know what? We are alive to fight. Okay, we are alive to fight. And I'm so happy that you are taking the charge to front. But I keep seeing 21 states. I keep seeing 21 states of youth getting together and changing a lot of things. I'm not sure where that's going to go. Maybe I'll talk to you in 10 years and you'll tell me. But I look forward to seeing you this weekend. And thank you so much for spending your time with me again. And I'm sorry for being a little bit late, but you know, things just happen the way they're supposed to. I'm going to
No,
fight
thank
my
you for having
phone
me.
now, Aaron, and I definitely can't wait to see you Saturday.
Yeah.
Call me later or text me later. You got my number, okay?
Okay, perfect. I
All
will.
right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, praise goes up, blessings come down. I need a blessing right now. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm a winner, yep, hallelujah. Praise goes up and the blessings come down. My swag straight from God's house. Help me, please. Open up your mouth. Deliver you. Truth every round. You best beware who you be round. That Satan ain't no joke. He's smart, he's real, he's slick, he's like, he's lucky. Got you sitting at home with a broken heart. Feeling like you're losing and he's tearing you apart. The devil is a liar. God already won.
You're listening to MarceyLynn once again on WNHH LP 103.5 FM, your home for community